completed, but sometimes you need to hit the brakes and say, okay, we have to step back from this, and unfortunately, we cannot get this person, or we cannot say this person's going to do such and such thing. We have to be extremely transparent and compliant. Otherwise, the consequences are very big, and the temptations are there for all of us every single day. And so it's really important that the industry self-police and make sure that everything is done orderly and properly. So with that said, any predictions on adjudications under the new scheme? Easier, tougher?
I don't know whether it will be immediate, but I think it will help us to be more prepared. As I said, we always have the experience of the USL visas, right? I mean,
right.
And there was a lot of about USA is coming with a memorandum, and we thought that's going to be the Bible, will everybody do it?
Right.
But then you had the googly which said that no, the consulate would not do it.
Right.
But at least that ambiguity does not exist with the CIC, so it's fortunate. So probably we expect the CHC, the Canadian High Commission, to work closely with them. With whatever they come in, I think it's going to be clearer to us of what to expect. That's one of the points that we also, which the minister also accepted, is that we don't want you to come up and say that we'll give you a 1 week or a 1.5 week of work permit. Right. You take 4 weeks is fine, but you tell us on what parameters so that we know the high jump bar which we want to jump through. So I think I expect this to be slow because the minister also mentioned that, as you also rightly said, it's a local politics. There's an interesting point saying that 85% of their approval rates at this point of time is 85%, right. Which is good than what most of us would be experiencing in the US. But also there's a lot of talk about which region, whether you would go to Ontario or you would go to Nova Scotia or you would go to Quebec, right. Because each of them have their own ways of looking the immigration. The Nova Scotia immigration minister was also there, and she said that I have an aging population, so I need more youngsters to come. But does the federal program allow us to send more to them? So that's a right. complex right. situation, and we are also driven by business. If nobody is working out of Halifax or Nova Scotia, I will not be sending them there.
Right.
So I think it's a complex things to talk about. As you rightly said, once you get into the office, you're not talking about sending that guy, just send this guy out, right? I mean, the client is demanding. But unless we step back and look, are we doing it the right way or not? Are we using the right process or not? Are we being compliant or not? I think it's going to be quite tough in the coming years, right? Everything is changing. I mean, 9/11 has changed again. The way right. we look at mobility now in the North America region. Well, I mean, just wait and watch, and probably we'll have more answers next time when we meet.
Yeah, and the good thing about the Canadians essentially is they're very receptive to this kind of feedback. So, when the August meeting happened and we had given them certain feedback on what we would like to see, now when we come back and we see what they're doing, it definitely has taken into account the inputs which we had provided to them as an industry. So that's a positive aspect of the Canadian, and again in this round when we were giving them feedback on the program, while they said their approvals have gone up from 80 to 85% in the last couple of months, which is a positive sign. And they were very receptive to seeing how they could help in defining much more clearly what would construe the eligibility for an intra-company transfer into Canada. And as today we are struggling to figure that definition really out or get that mix correct, resulting in quite a bit of rejections. So we are hopeful, as he's given us an unofficial timeline of December end to get back to us, or early next year. We hope by that time they would look at addressing this out, and it would make us better prepared to be able to identify the right people within the organization and make a determination whether they would really qualify for the intra-company transfer or not, thereby increasing the predictability, which was another key point which we made to them, saying for us, a 2-week process or a 4-week or a 6-week process is not as important as for us to be able to predict the outcome that is going to happen. Because you tell us it's going to take 2 weeks, we can start planning for that. You tell us it's going to take 4 weeks, we can plan for that. But at the end of 4 weeks, if you come and tell us, hey, you know what, I don't believe this guy falls under the definition of how we interpret the ICT to be, then we are back 4 weeks. The delivery is back 4 weeks. The business units are now, trying to scramble and figure out how do they staff the requirement at such short notice. So they were pretty receptive to those, and let's see. I can guess in the coming days this is going to get only more easier than tougher, given the way that the Canadians operate.
I have a quick question. Do you think a lot of this is based on the new government, the Trudeau government versus the Harper, or is it because the economy is doing so well and there's such demand for IT and other projects, workers in Canada, that finally the Canadian government's listening and saying we have to do something?
Yes, I guess, the outlook I believe this government has as far as immigration is concerned is a little different from the stances which have been taken in the past by the previous governments, and they definitely are far more outward looking. And yes, they have their own internal compulsions, a diminishing and aging population, the need to have a younger population in the country, the need to make sure that they're not left behind in the technology race today, because if you see the last real big technology innovation which came in from Canada was the BlackBerry, which
Right.
was, ruling the roost at one point of time. But today, if you see, it's been relegated to a minuscule player, and, probably catering only to a niche segment of people. So I guess they realize that, they need to constantly innovate, and their existing population may not really be able to meet their need, and which is why they need to look at getting the best resources and talent from overseas to make sure that they continue to remain competitive.
Wonderful. Thank you. Karen, do you have anything further to add to that in terms of immediate outlook, or what about long-term outlook? Let's say that for some reason the economy slows down in Canada and there's less, if you will, contractual relationships with foreign companies or international consulting companies. How do you feel that would impact today's policy and adjudication of work permits?
I think the answer to that would be the Canadian government, at least what I would gather from reading the report and talking to them, is that they are looking long term, and it is not short term knee-jerk reaction they want to do. Because if I look at it, as I said earlier, it talks about a highly skilled global skill category of people coming in. I think that's going to rule the roost in terms of how your economy grows. As you see, globalization has been able to change economy of a lot of people. It's changed for India, it's changed for Europe, and a lot of other changes has happened. I think the best part is that it is looking at a long-term solution, and I think they have accepted the fact that yes, in the long-term solution, they have an aging population, they have a restriction on making skilled labor available in the IT sector. And for that, it has to be filled by two things. I mean, I just go back to the Singapore government doing that, saying that let's spend more on universities. Because I think what has happened over a period of time is that a lot of these countries have reduced their spend on education. Yeah. And if you look at the number of colleges and engineers who pass out of India, I mean, whether they are deployable or not, I mean, that's a different part. But I think there is a steady flow of engineers that is required. So somewhere I think mobility is going to get into the crux of all political, economical situations. To a large extent, mobility will help them maintain both balances. Right. And I think that's the best part of how the Canadian government is looking at it.
And again, the Canadian government is not just focusing on one aspect of immigration. They are looking at it from a multiple point of view. And there's, they're looking at it from family-based immigration. Yeah. So one of the other points which the minister mentioned the other day was, they were really aghast when they figured out that for a family reunion, it takes 2 years for the spouse to be able to join the other partner in Canada. And they said, you know what, we took a look at it and this is definitely not acceptable. We need to make sure that, we address this appropriately so that the families can be together much more quickly. They are looking at not just, they're looking specifically at the tech sector. They are looking at the other industries which they have. So, you have a lot of these provincial nomination programs which focus on the industries within the provinces that they have, to make sure that the resources or the skills required for those industries are also made available. Then, they're also looking at general immigration into Canada, where they believe that these resources would add value to the Canadian economy. And also, they have opened their doors to the refugee crisis and ensured that, those people who are displaced or forcibly displaced have been able to find a new home in Canada. So they're taking a pretty holistic view, keeping in view the economic conditions within Canada and the global happenings to come up with, how they would want to view and look at immigration into Canada. So I think it's a pretty long-drawn and well thought-about strategy, and we have to just wait and watch and see how it unfolds in the coming
Actually,
years.
sorry.
Sorry, please go ahead.
So I think just to add on to that, Anuj, I think 2015 they started the Express Visa scheme.
Express visa,
And I
yes.
think I've
Entry.
been reading reports of how the quota gets exhausted in 4 to 5 months.
Right.
I think so they've understood that, as Anuj mentioned, there's a balance between a family-based immigration and a business immigration. They're trying to balance both of them. So my view is that you give more and more permanent residency to skilled people. You are putting them back into your local labor market, which you're then forcing companies like us to say, you wanted a market, I've created a market for you, which is unrestricted work. Now go hire them.
Right.
So I think it's a well thought process. Hopefully, I think it will all fall into place over a period of time, and we're just waiting to be part of that.
And I think there's going to be an increase of 25%, I think, for the
Yes, absolutely.
business employment base. So,
Yeah.
but just to wrap this up, and we haven't had a chance to take any questions. One thing I wanted to ask, but we ran out of time, is how do you make sure that when there's a change in the field with your consultants, how is that reported immediately before someone executes a change without the proper, filing and amendments?
Sure. So, that's the. I mean, we don't have challenges like what we have in the US, but definitely, I think going back to what the first panel was talking about data and technology, I think that is key. So, any assignments that need to be changed, most of them do get known to the line managers or to the reporting manager a week and a half before.
Right.
So we use technology to ensure that data between an assignment system and a visa system talk to each other, because we can't just be sitting in silos and waiting for somebody to wake up and say, oh, I've been working at this location from yesterday types.
Right.
And with the increased compliance that are happening, the inspections and the watch list that you're on and things like that, it makes it more difficult. So for us, we're looking at having accurate data. That accurate data syncs across to ensure that you have an assignment, you have a travel a system which talks to each other, so that right and accurate information comes to you for the person to act on it, to take necessary action.
And you're not looking at just capturing this information at one point. As in the previous presentation, we were talking of end-to-end in the people supply chain management process. You look at trying to get this data out from multiple points of view. So be it a point where someone raises a request to reserve this resource for an upcoming project or a new project at a different location, to a point where the employee is going and trying to raise a travel request on the system. You make sure you capture the information from the travel request system and compare all of those, okay, to make sure that it is consistent and compliant. And if you notice any discrepancy or any issue over there, you need to ensure that you put a stop to it over there, take the necessary corrective action before you let things proceed.
So well-designed process.
Yes.
That's objective, that will trigger these events, versus human or subjective decision-making,
Absolutely.
especially when you're moving that many
Yeah.
people. Right.
Absolutely.
I think that wraps up this panel. I
Yes,
don't think we have time for questions.
think we have-
Or should we? Okay. I'm sorry? Okay. What? Sure. Okay.
So the first question, why do most companies
I'm sorry. Yeah, I see that. Okay.
prefer going the easy way by applying for business visas rather than work permits? Well, so there are two ways to look at it. What is your short-term goal and what is your long-term goal, and where can this kind of thing land you up in? Yes, while there may be organizations who have that kind of practice, it's definitely not something which is advisable, because in the long run, it's going to land up harming you more rather than bringing you business benefits in that country. There have been several organizations who have been caught, audited, and penalized significantly for these kind of practices. So that's something I think we should really, as immigration professionals, be putting our foot down and saying, you know what, while we do understand and appreciate the fact that a business visa is far more easy to obtain, okay, but what is more important here is what is the purpose of this person's visit, and we need to make sure that the visit takes place on the appropriate visa and not on the easiest visa that you can obtain. Penalties, debarment from the work permit programs, those are things which you definitely don't want coming against your organization's name, because the impact of that is far more humongous than the short-term goal.
Since it's regarding companies, I'll have you answer as well, if you don't mind, just your version, and we'll
I
take
think
this
I
at one
agree.
go.
It's not about the easy way out. It is the most appropriate one. If you look at it, you might get a business visa in a week, but you're going into the wrong path, and that is something which is not suggestible, because one thing we'll have to understand, the changing scenarios have been that as and much they want to make things easier for all of us to work and get access to the labor market, they're making compliance more and more hard. Audits are happening, you don't want to get a notice. So I think it's an appetite that each of you will have to take a call and say, look, I don't want to do it. I would rather prefer 4 weeks to wait and get a work permit. And you've got a better 85% chance of approval, so why not try it?
And I think that's one of the reasons why the Canadian government's trying to reduce the adjudication, because it is interfering with business. But, the shortcut or the convenience should never take place of what's the right thing to do. And one error, or 1 or 2 or 10 visas, whatever the case may be, may severely impact many more employees and projects and work in the future. So it's one of those things where you don't want short-term objectives to interfere with the long-term viability of a program. So, okay, I think there's another question. Why do most companies don't have process Canadian visas in-house?
That's because you have
Is it is it because it's complicated or low volume? That's another one for corporations, so
Yeah,
I'll let you take that one, Karen.
I'll probably have to mute your line and then we can.
Okay.
So I don't know. What I'm saying, it depends on, as I said, what you want to do. Some of them have an process, and you would have because at the end of the day, specialized knowledge is something that you have to be clear about. Specialized knowledge is not about what the client does. Somebody says he's an 10-year experience in Unix and has been doing for Deutsche Bank for the last 5 years and is specialized knowledge. No. I think that is where that ability to assess comes in, where you have attorney firms like Rami or others to tell you that, look, this is where you run the risk of doing it wrong. I think that's where you need advice, and it's left to the individual organization to say whether you take an advice only, or you help them in processing, or you do it. I think that's what is important. At the end of the day, you will have to understand that it's immigration is complicated. It is not just about a form which just clicks somewhere and somebody signs it. You are attesting under perjury of law on a lot of things, and you have to be sure about it. Yes, the chance of getting caught is 1 in a million, but nobody in this room wants to be that one person.
Take that either.
Yeah.
Well, I think with data mining and a lot of governments and government agencies within governments comparing data, it's going to be much easier to track someone and find things. In fact, a lot of governments are asking employees of companies to share information. So I think with social media and everything out there, it's going to be really hard to sort of not talk about things that are not done properly. And so I think you have to be extremely careful. And I don't think, and I hope no one would do anything intentionally, but even just from a sort of a negligent point of view of just condoning something or not paying as close attention to it is going to be problematic in the future. Because that could be looked at as a willful disregard of something. And so it's very critical that that you also do internal audits. I think that's very critical. Even if you do it in-house, do the work in-house, it's critical to do external internal audits. So bringing in an outside provider that can probably push back a little bit, because there is a lot of pressure for those of you that work in-house. There's a lot of pressure from sales folks, business folks, projects, and clients to get things done. And sometimes by working with an outside entity, whether it's a law firm or a compliance agency, whatever the case may be, depending on the government that you're working with, it's easier to make the process open and more transparent and more objective. Because sometimes, unfortunately, there'll be pressure for people just do it, just get it along. I think everyone has that nowadays. So with an outside provider or professional organization, I think it can help foster the case and help organizations police the process to make sure that it is objectively compliant, not just internally or subjectively compliant. So I think that's very critical. I want to answer the last, or ask an